What is up, everyone? Welcome to another weekly news video. There's only a few things I want to touch on today. You can see those topics down in the description below via the chapters, so I thought we could just jump straight into it today. The first thing I want to touch on is this pretty cool news from Fanatics via, expected number one draft pick Victor Wembanyama. This is in relation to a Bowman University card. It's out of 99, but basically, as you can sort of see on the front of the card, Victor has inscribed it, the first card I have ever signed. Now, a few questions have come up off the back of this, that he's actually signed other cards in the past. I think this is going to be, the first official card that he signed. But I want to talk to, why things like this from Fanatics makes me a little bit excited for, where things might be going in the future, right? I think this is something that, if they were to do for sort of every NBA, prospect or football prospect moving forward, and include these as, box toppers in products or, other chase cards for people to go out there and try and get, I think is a really cool thing. I've talked in the past about, these manufacturers, these graders, these pillars of the trading card industry needing to do things to try and innovate. It's talking to things like this, right? Because when you innovate and you sort of disrupt the existing, industry and the ecosystem, it means we as collectors, as the end consumer, end up getting more value out of them, right? And while something as simple as this might be like, okay, what's the big deal, Daniel? It's like, well, if you start doing things like this for certain prospects, or maybe all prospects, and you start putting these, into product either via box toppers or actually chase cards that you can try and get, that's an added dimension for people to want to go ahead and buy that product, right? Because even though this is an out of 99 card, this might command a price that might rival cards that are far lower numbers serial than this, including even one of ones, which, I really like the fact they've done this, on a higher numbered card. And I hope if they do continue to do it, they do it that way. Because like I said, this is a really cool way to get more chase happening with the product. And some people might say, well, it's just a cash grab, whatever. You would have seen me put out a video maybe a week ago now talking about serial numbered cards and why maybe they're not as valuable as people might think. So if you haven't seen that, please check it out. I'll pop it up on screen now. But things like this, increasing the scarcity, giving us more chase cards that actually have a deeper meaning, giving us cooler things to try and go hit in certain products, I think is a really, really cool thing. And I find it a bit hard to sort of hate on Fanatics for this one. So I really hope they continue with it, because I think this is a good, step in the right direction of trying to bring scarcity back for us as collectors or card investors, whatever you want to classify yourself as. Because things like this, in my opinion, are only a good thing, right? More chase, more scarcity gets people excited, which means people want to buy more cards, which means people want to collect more cards, they want to open more product. It gets people talking, gets people excited, which I think, is pretty cool. Now, the next thing I want to talk to is essentially a counterpoint, the flip of what we just spoke about for Fanatics, right? On one instance, you've got Fanatics looking like they're about to do something new by increasing scarcity and value and all the things we just touched on. Yet now with the release of 21-22 Flawless Basketball, it looks as though, Panini is doing the opposite, right? They're just dumping product, dumping more one-of-ones and Logoman into this thing, which is essentially, in my opinion, going to devalue things. It's the opposite of what, Fanatics is trying to do, right? It's not really scarce anymore. They're just pumping things as they have done for the last few years. And all the issues that I'm about to talk to with what you're seeing on screen right now goes to, the things we spoke about in that serial number video that I referenced a little bit earlier, because there's 1,100, one-of-ones in this. There's 101 Logoman, 12 dual Logoman, 5 triple Logoman, which is a bit crazy. And the general vibe from people commenting on this within the, card collecting space is that it's too much. And I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this, because, one of the things I've spoken about with my concern with Fanatics long-term is, okay, if they come in and start doing the exact same thing that, Panini is trying to do or is doing right now, and including over the last 2 to 3 years, what is the hobby going to look like in 5-10 years time? Fanatics is looking at and talking to, I think Jeff Wilson was quoted as saying this, looking to 10 times the customer base within the hobby, right? So increase the hobby 10 times. It might have even been more than that, which is, pretty crazy. And if you want that sort of volume of people and you want things to be sustainable long term, yes, you obviously need to print more cards, but you need to sort of go about it the right way. Like I touched on when Fanatics first announced that they were coming on board, I spoke to how they somehow need to print more cards but maintain the scarcity for the hits, because in the modern day, I don't need to, this is nothing breaking news, right? But people bust product, they put it into a sleeve straight away, it goes into a one touch or goes into a top loader, and if it's a good card, it goes to the grader immediately. So in the grand scheme of things, given they're printing so many more cards, they're printing so many more parallels, things are blowing up, how are they going to maintain scarcity long term to the point where you've got so many customers in the hobby, you've got so many collectors, so many investors? Like, are these things going to be rare in 10, 15, 20 years time? Like, what's going to make people still want to, place these high prices on them? That's the part that I'm not quite understanding. It hasn't clicked in my head as to what the future might look like. And again, nobody really knows, but that's where my mind is essentially going. Like, if Fanatics keeps printing like this until they basically licenses hand over to Fanatics, and then Fanatics come on board, and do the same thing, and that thing we spoke to earlier is just a flash in the pan kind of thing. What's the sustainability of this hobby going to look like long term? I'm very keen to get your thoughts on that one as well. And if you want to check this out yourself, you can sort of see that they break it up a little bit more with regards to the breakdown hit rates and things like that for certain teams and players. I think as players over here, which I think is a really cool thing. But like I said, it's pretty scary what it might look like long term if this kind of thing continues. And I just want to go back to this thing again. Like, something like this is really cool because, yes, they are still printing more parallels, and Fanatics have touched on doing negative parallels and all that kind of crap. But something like this, at least that's a little bit different. That's, okay, saying this card is the first one he ever signs, so it's a little bit more value. That should retain some sort of value long term. Like, do we really need this many logo, man? If you've got, 1,100 one-of-ones in Flawless, does that make the one-of-one a little bit worthless in the grand scheme of things? And I'd be keen to see what the breakdown looks like for certain players, how many one-of-ones certain players have. But that many logo, man, like, again, I understand there's a lot of people now that want to pay big money for these things, but like, come on, if they do this every single year, does that then lose the appeal of the logo, man? I'm not in the market for that stuff, so my opinion doesn't really matter, but, I kind of think it does. So let me know what your thoughts are down, in the comments below. Now, the last thing I want to talk to is actually a few interesting comments from the Cage lawyer in a recent The Hobby with Cage episode, the one specifically referring to trimming, as you can see on screen. And I think some of these comments that he highlights here indicates a few gaps that sometimes, influential people, senior people, have within the card industry that often indicates they might not have, the finger on the pulse of what, the core collector, the average Joe collector actually wants or talks about. And this was off the back of the Jason Koontz interview with Jeremy Lee, where basically Jeremy had Jason on and talked through the Evan Mathis trimming scandal. Now, we talked to this earlier on in the week, and I spoke to how it was a really interesting interview. But what Cage touched on here firstly was talking about how he didn't like the fact that so much of the conversation was in the wrong places, right? And so many people were, talking hot air on the whole situation. And he was specifically referring to how people were talking about, well, if the grader misses it, does that mean trimming is okay? If I make the card look like it did from the factory or how it should have looked from the factory, does that make it okay? If the buyer can't notice it, does that make it okay? And, I agree, those things are freaking ludicrous. And I was shocked, as I touched on in my videos on this topic, that, so many people in the comments agreed with all those things and thought they were okay. Just like I was shocked when I, talked about that stuff when the whole Kurt's Card Care thing popped off, 12 months ago, whenever it was. And, that was, I think, a good discussion point from Cage, and I agree with him for the most part. I think that stuff should still be discussed to have, some deeper discussion on the hobby, right? But the thing that I thought was a little bit odd, or not odd, but highlights maybe a gap that sometimes influential people have within the hobby and within the industry, is that he sort of came out and said, well, trimming is bad. Who cares about all that sort of stuff? Trimming is bad. That's all you need to know. And he basically said, I'm pretty sure I'm the first person to come out and say that. Yet, like channels like myself, Sports Card Dad, many others, I could probably name 10, 15, 20, and there's probably hundreds talk to the exact, thing that he said hadn't happened, right? And he basically, implied either intentionally or accidentally around, people focusing in on the wrong topics. And that's probably just a misspeak on his behalf, but it goes to, like I said in my comment down here, you need to expand your circle so you're not essentially stuck in an echo chamber. And I'm not saying that's what Cage has done, and he may have misspoken in this specific instance, so I do apologize. I really respect Cage. I've been following him for a long time. I love hearing what he has to say. He's definitely one of the better ones when it comes to calling out things, even though there's been questions about PWCC and BGS in the past. I'll leave those aside for now. But you often get this, especially with, what is considered a boys club or a bit of an echo chamber with some of these content creators, where they sort of stay in their circle, or they only, look at certain people because they might see content like the Sports Card Dad as an example and say, well, he basically calls people out sometimes, or he's all, clickbaity, or he's negative, so we're not going to listen to him. Same sort of thing with Sports Card Radio, maybe same sort of stuff with myself. So they don't listen to the opinion, so they stay in that circle of, there's people that they do know and do know in person and do want to, communicate with. yet those people have sponsorships, those people have influences on them that might mean they're not independent to a situation, meaning they can't comment on certain things, meaning they don't dig deep on certain issues. So when you're not, expanding your knowledge and you're staying in that circle, that might be why you can say that nobody really came out and said, trimming is bad, even though the specific interview that Cage is referring to here, i.e. the Jeremy Lee interview, Jeremy very clearly multiple times said, trimming is bad, don't do it. I don't agree with anything you're saying, Evan. I don't agree with, half the things you're saying, Jason, which, again, is, I think, a very, very fair point. You need to also, talk about things. I can understand his frustration with people talking about those 3 topics I touched on earlier that try to justify why trimming is okay. But that stuff, does need to be talked about as well, because it's good to have, deeper discussions on the hobby. Because I think Cage also referenced in this, video that, trimming's been around for 20-something years. Why are people shocked it's happening now? Well, you've got so many new people coming into the hobby, right? And so many of them saw this and were like, holy heck, what the heck is going on? This is crazy. People need to talk about it, which is why you've seen these discussion points come up, right? Now, again, I may have taken some of Cage's comments out of context, so I do apologize if that was the case, but I just thought it was, a good example, right? You've got somebody that's very influential saying they hadn't seen it yet. There is, tens, if not hundreds of people talking about the same sort of thing. So, or talking about the thing that he said didn't happen. So it is what it is. I hope you liked the video. Let me know your thoughts on this one. I thought it was a quick one. It may have gone for a bit longer, only 3 topics today, but let me know if there was anything else you think I should have covered this week or anything else you want me to cover in the next week. I just thought this was a pretty good one. We had very 2 counterpoints there of, what Fanatics is doing and then what Panini's come out and announced, and just a pretty good conversation there from Cage that I think, indicates some gaps that sometimes influential people have within our hobby, because either they choose not to listen to the smaller guy, or they just don't see it themselves because they're in that little bit of a echo chamber and they stay in their own circles who also, think the same sort of way as them. So again, no hate at all towards Cage or anything like that. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.